And we are golden. All right. Hello, all. We're welcoming everyone. We'll take a few minutes to get everybody on board with our Back to Business Basics webinar today. We would, Jill Meyer, for coming here to hear more. If you could, as you're coming into the webinar, and by the way, we are recording. Just in the chat, put your name and where you're from. We're expecting a bunch of folks today, so it would be helpful for us to know who's here and what company you're coming from or geographic area, whatever you'd like to share with us today. There we go. And we've already got questions. Oh, and Mr. Remster is saying hello.
Oh, hello, Ed.
Glad you could join us, Ed. All right, everybody's coming on board. As you're coming on, Erica's here. Hey, Erica. Hey, Michael. So glad you guys could join us today.
Erica, hello.
Got some newbies, we've got some oldies. No,
hey, Michael's here from RCH. Hello.
As they're all coming on board again. Hey, Fran, how are you? Good to have you. Thank you so much for letting us know. If just again, name, rank, and serial number in the chat would be lovely. Out of New Jersey. Hey, Madison, how are you? Hey, Susie, how are you? Thanks for joining us today. Hey, Bob. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll take one more minute. Give you guys 3 minutes to come on board with us. Hey, Valoria. Hey, how are you? I know I saw some names from the past. We've got some entrepreneur in residence. Thanks, Bob. Name and where you are from in the chat, folks, so we know who we're talking to. Hey, Faith. Oh my heaven, that's definitely a name from the past.
Hello, Janelle. Shout out to Janelle.
Oh, and we've got Texas. We've got Sam Houston.
Love it. Love it.
Hey, Nicole. Good to see you. Good to hear you. Good to have you here. All right. What do you think, Jill?
I think we're good to go.
All right. Lovely. All right. So a couple of things. We'll be sharing our slide deck today. We are recording, just so you all know, and this recording will be made available to you at the end. So that you please be expecting an email first thing tomorrow morning, probably, with links and all that type of stuff. We will be doing, please put your questions in the Q&A. Jill and I are going to be going back and forth here. So we're looking forward to interacting with you. This is a working session, folks. So we're going to be asking for your feedback and comments. Thank you again to everyone for joining us today on our Back to Business Basics webinar. Whether you are a newbie to the 4 decisions and the Scaling Up operating system, or someone who's been practicing for years and just needed a reminder and maybe a reboot, we're happy to have you with us. And we're looking forward to a very interactive session. I'm Cheryl Beth Cookler. I'm the founder and the president of CEO Think Tank. We're celebrating our 25th year in business. We've been in the small mid-market space for almost 20 years now, partnering with CEOs, entrepreneurs, and other C-level executives to help create and grow more valuable, profitable, and sustainable companies. I've also been a certified Scaling Up coach for about 12 years now, and I'm pleased to introduce my wingwoman, partner in crime, and an alum of our CEO Think Tank program, Jill Himmelman, who is going to be co-presenting with me today. She's the founder and president of Learnia Training Solutions, an e-learning education company for the past 20 years. And she's also a certified scaling up coach, as well as a practitioner of scaling up. Again, I want to do a special shout out. That's one of the things that we do with CEO Think Tank. A very, very big thank you to a few folks that helped us with our recruiting for this webinar today. Della Clark at the Enterprise Center here in Philadelphia, Marcia O'Connor at the O'Connor Group and her team, Debbie Albert from Albert Communications, Ami Kasser from Multifunding, and Mike Maxon from CRI. They've been helping us to spread the word about this event, so thank you. And for those of you that are on today, we are planning on doing this in 2021 at once a quarter. So if you find these webinars to be valuable, useful, and actionable, please spread the word through your networks when we do the next one in May. And as I said, we'll be taking questions at the end. If you can please just put them into the Q&A, that would be great. So we have 3 learning objectives for you today. The first is to help you understand the 4 critical decisions that you need to grow your business profitably as well as sustainably. 2, we're going to learn more about the 3 barriers to growth and how to overcome them. And 3, we're going to be introducing you to a roadmap to scale up, as well as, of course, the Scaling Up operating system specifically designed to improve your execution, help you manage your talent, increase your cash flow, and drive top-line growth. We also plan on giving you 3 key takeaways: an assessment of your lead domino for growth, which will help you to identify the key critical decision that you need to focus on in the next year to have the biggest impact on your business. A documented roadmap for growth that you can use to pilot your course, and a set of tools and best practices, a toolkit, as it were, to help you and your company take your company rather from good to great, as Jim Collins would say. And finally, at the very end, there are 5 of you who we are going to offer an opportunity to analyze your own cash flow to show you how to improve your cash flow and the profitability in your business. So stay tuned to hear more on that. So let's get right in, shall we? Historically, we have found that there are 3 areas where CEOs and C-level executives in the small and small mid-market space struggle. 1, they struggle with maintaining their profitability as they grow, and we'll talk a little bit more about this. As they grow and add infrastructure and people, profitability becomes an issue. Number 2, they have too many competing priorities, and it's not always clear which are the right ones to focus on in order to accelerate their growth and create a more robust business. And 3, they struggle to hold people accountable to their commitments and get them all pulling in the same direction. And of course, most recently, with all things COVID, most people have less time and less bandwidth to get things done. And if you're like many of us and you don't want to reinvent the wheel, you'd much rather have a tool and a process that you could go to and accelerate your growth. So we do want to acknowledge that many of us are struggling to manage everything, whether it's kids at home, a remote workforce, applying for PPP, or you may be in the midst of a strategic pivot because of COVID and changing market dynamics. We recognize that managing remotely is a challenge all by itself. It takes 2 to 3 times more energy to do so. So if you feel like the temperature has risen, you're right, it has. So our educated guess is that those of you are on the call because you're struggling with one of these challenges, which again is why you're on the call. Or, as I said earlier, you're familiar with scaling up and you're looking for a reset and a reboot. So if you could just take a minute and in the chat, we'd be curious to know, why are you here? What is the biggest challenge that's facing you right now? And if you can take a few moments and put that into the chat, that would be very helpful for us to get a little bit of feedback on. Remember, oh, look at that. Mr. Gilfellen is here, Jill.
Oh, good. Hey, Rob. Good.
So take a minute in the chat. What is your biggest challenge right now? Accountability piece. There you go, Victoria, thanks. What else? Other big challenges that you're facing that you need assistance with?
Next level management.
Next level of management. Understanding numbers. Jill, there's somebody there, Janelle.
Yep. Not alone.
Priorities, Denise, yes. What priorities matter? Okay.
Priorities. Yep.
Oh, hey, Marshall. Glad you could join us. Sales, Erica, thank you. Anything else? Any others? Glad to be here. Good to have you. Okay, good. Thank you. Feel free to just add as we're going through. Again, questions, feedback, all that type of thing, please put in the chat so that we can sort of stay on top of how we're doing here. Thanks, Rob. So no matter what, our plan today is to give you practical assistance to deal with these struggles proactively and productively. Because when all is said and done, and you're at your wit's end about the direction that you should take, what I love about the Scaling Up operating system and Vern Harnish's work is it really comes down to 4 critical things, 4 critical decisions that you need to think about when it comes to running and growing your companies. People, strategy, execution, and cash. But what we've found in the past 2 decades is that typically one of these areas, one of these legs of the table is your short leg. You know, the one at the restaurant that you're constantly sticking sugar packets under. And that's the leg, that's the decision that is getting in the way of your progress and growth. The question becomes, what's your short leg? Because most companies, of course, have issues in all 4. So the first decision is, where do you focus first? So let's talk a little bit just to get you rolling about what might be your short leg. Here's some questions for you to think about. So get out a piece of paper and a pencil and start jotting some notes down. In the people area, are the stakeholders engaged in your business, your people, your customers, your suppliers, and would you enthusiastically rehire everyone on your team? Or do you maybe have a partner issue or an ownership issue or an employee who's mucking up the attitudes of others or ruining your culture? Or are you missing a key executive and you are carrying the load, or you just can't find enough of the right people? If these are some of the issues that are challenging you, then people may be your short leg. Are your gross margin dollars growing as fast as you'd like? Which means you have something that people want and are actually willing to pay good money for. Something that you may have heard Greg Crabtree, the author of Simple Numbers 2.0, say, one of our financial resources for those of you struggling with finance, at our live event that we had last September. If that might be your issue, then maybe strategy is your short leg. Number 3, have you increased revenue? Have you grown top line, but your net profitability has dropped? Are you spending more hours working on your business and not less, with a lot of drama? Do you have an accountability problem? If so, you may have an execution issue, and that may be your short leg. And finally, you know, you can get by with decent people strategy and execution, but not a day without cash. We always say cash is like oxygen. And it's not necessarily just about just making payroll. It's about having a cash reserve, 2 to 3 months cash reserve, to take advantage of unforeseen opportunities and challenges that are presented by things like a pandemic. So again, think about it. People, strategy, execution, cash. What do you think your short leg might be off the top of your head? And put it in the chat.
And just to, we see that a lot of people are sending their chat comments to just the panelists. If you could send them to everyone, that would be awesome. So when you're in the chat.
Yes, and the rubber chicken, yes, one of our accountability tools is in the background. Most people are only sending the comments. Yes, thanks. All of the above. Oh, come on, Beth. What's your number one?
What do you think your number one is?
Looking for your number one, folks. What do you think it is? Are you having an engagement and a talent problem? Are you having a top line growth problem and a pivot problem? Are you having a getting things done, priority setting problem? Or are you having a I really need cash right now? You can post it. That would be great. Strategy and execution, execution, execution. Yep, there it is, Jill.
Yeah.
Ownership issue solved. Good job. Yay. So excited to hear that, Michael.
Getting things done. Strategy and execution are coming up a lot.
Okay, great. All right, well, keep them coming, because our plan in the next segment is to help you further verify that educated guess and to get some data to maybe either, yeah, this is the right one, or you know what, I wasn't thinking about that. So Jill is going to lead us through a quick assessment in order to get us further along the path.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Cheryl Beth, for the handover here. So one of the things we want to do with you this morning is actually for you to take an assessment that will help you identify where your short leg is. And so this assessment was sent out to you, I think on Sunday night, but don't panic if you didn't take it. We're going to take it now. So this is where you can do it. If you want these questions again after we go through it off of the CEO Think Tank website, but let's take the assessment now. So this is an assessment, or what we refer to affectionately as the 4D, 4 decision assessment, that will help you identify where your short leg is. And so I want everybody to grab a piece of paper, a pen or a pencil, because we're going to do this live with you. Did we tell you we're going to put you to work this morning? If not, welcome to it. So everybody grab a pen, and we want to walk through this assessment, and you're going to have to tell us at the end of this segment in the chat window where your short leg is based on the assessment. All right, so here we go. So I'm going to read 10 statements, and I want you to rank your company on a scale of 1 to 5 for each statement, with 5 meaning that you strongly agree with the statement and 1 meaning that you strongly disagree. So 1 to 5 here. All right, here we go. So question number 1. So answer this for your company. We have a clear sense of our key differentiators and win deals much more often than we lose. 5 strongly agree, 1 strongly disagree, somewhere in the middle. So put down your number for question 1. Question 2, we have a clearly articulated vision, or as Jim Collins calls it, BHAG, Big Hairy Audacious Goal, written and understood by our employees, and that goal drives people forward with excitement. Question 3, we gather feedback on an ongoing basis from our customers and employees to improve the company. Question 4, we have the right people in the right seats with key accountabilities and targets defined for success in their jobs. Everyone understands how they're going to get an A. Question 5, we have core values which we use to attract, hire, and engage our employees, and have created a solid virtual bench of candidates as a result. 6, we have a cash reserve, or core capital as we call it, of 2 to 3 months of operating expenses. Question 7, we have plenty of time to plan for the company because we do such little firefighting. Sound familiar? 8, we review our most important metrics or key performance indicators daily and weekly to make sure things are running on time and on target. Question 9, we have a written business plan that we use to direct our activities on a weekly basis. And the last question, we regularly accomplish most of what we set out to accomplish, including hitting or exceeding our targeted numbers. Okay, just make sure that you've ranked each one of these questions on a scale of 1 to 5, and we're going to see how you did here. So let's go to that. So go ahead and score your assessment by adding up all the numbers. I just did that magically on mine, but go ahead and add them all up. And I'll give you a minute.
You need to find the calculator on your phone.
Yeah. I'm going to wait 10 more seconds. It seems like an eternity, but I know you're adding up numbers. And actually, why don't you put your number in the chat? That'll tell me when everyone's done.
Your total number.
Your total score.
There we go.
Okay. Good. 30s.
Oh, this is great. Look at this.
Good.
Thanks,
Awesome.
folks.
All right. So here's the deal. If you score between 40 and 50, it looks like you're generally doing well, and there may be an opportunity to elevate your performance. If you have a score between 30 and 40, and it looks like there's a lot of 30s in there, you're probably right on track, but there is room for improvement. And then if you score less than 30, then you're taking a significant risk with your business. And we would definitely recommend that you invest time to better understand why that is. So how do you know which one might be your short leg? Because that's why we're doing this, right? So here's how it works. In the assessment, there are 3 strategy questions, 2 people questions, 1 cash question, and 4 execution questions. And the companies that are most well positioned for success, that are growing sustainably, profitably, and predictably, are getting 4s and 5s on these questions. If you're not getting 4 or 5s on the questions, that might be an indication of your short leg or your short legs. And again, we'll be sending you a link to this assessment. So if you want to take it again, you'll be able to do so.
And Beth Ward actually is suggesting that you give it to your team members as well.
I think that's a great idea, because it'd be good to see their perspective at a minimum. So go ahead and take a moment and put in the chat where your short leg based on the assessment might be. And then did that help you confirm what you believed your short leg was at the beginning before we took the assessment, or do you have a different answer now? So go ahead and let us know.
Yeah, what is based on the assessment?
Yep.
What is your short leg? Is it strategy? Is it people? Is it cash? Is it execution?
Cash came up. All right, good.
Yeah, so good.
Confirmation.
Great.
Execution, 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 and strategy. Expected. Good.
strategy, execution,
Good. Yes, it affirms.
people.
Oh, we got a people in there.
7, 8, execution.
All right.
Thought, but okay. All right. Well, we
Good.
can word it cash.
Okay, so let's take a couple of minutes and dig deeper into each of these short legs. And what we want to do is define them a little bit more and then provide you with some tools on how you can get started addressing your short leg. So again, this is a back to basics webinar. So we're going to pull in some old, some growth tools and some things, resources that might help you address your short leg. So
And
let's
we'll be providing these links of these to you again in tomorrow's email.
So let's start with people. So as Cheryl Beth mentioned earlier, there may be reasons why you have a people short leg, right? So take a minute and read through these questions. This is how you might know you have a people short leg.
Interesting.
So if people could be your short leg, there are a couple of tools that you can use to start help addressing your people challenge. So we're going to talk about 2 of them. The first is a function accountability chart. And, or sometimes we call this the face or the fascia, if you want to get, you know, tricky about it. So the function accountability chart, it's a people tool, and it helps identify the people who are accountable for different functions in your business. And the function is not the same as a job title. You can refer to these as departments or business lines within your organization if you're a bigger company. The face is really a powerful assessment of the different functions of your company, who is ultimately accountable for that function, and then the KPIs, the key performance indicators, both lagging and leading, that the function is accountable for. So in general, you should revisit this whenever accountabilities change. So if during this last year, during the pandemic, if you had to downsize, if you had to resize, upsize, or if you had a reorganization, or if you had to strategically pivot as a company, this would be a really good exercise to do to ensure that everyone's clear on accountabilities as you move into 2021. And even if people isn't your short leg, this exercise we typically do every 6 months with organizations. And it's just a really good idea, again, back to basics, to make sure everyone is clear on the functions in your organization and who's accountable and what kind of outputs you're really looking for from each of those functions. Okay.
And for those of you with having execution problems, this actually may be a good place to start.
Yeah, that's a good point. The second tool that might be helpful for any organization, regardless of size, are job scorecards. And each position in your organization, and it usually starts with the leadership team, should have a scorecard for 2021. And each position should know what outcomes are expected of it. So the difference between, some people say, but I have job descriptions. Job descriptions are great at listing activities. Job scorecards are great at listing outcomes. They're fundamentally different. So scorecards can be written and rewritten anytime a new or different accountabilities become apparent. So again, with what we've gone through in the last year, changes to position scorecards may have happened, and you want to revisit them or write them in the first place. If you're planning on hiring this year, then the job scorecard can be used internally to objectively kind of evaluate job candidates based on outcomes and on competencies. And then these can also serve the basis as drafting a job description if you want it to work that way. There's a few best practices with job scorecards. So you want to be specific about drafting your desired outcomes for that position. And ideally, you want to look at scorecards for each position on a quarterly basis to see if they need to be updated, because job scorecards aren't static, right? They're dynamic. They're going to change as the objectives and initiatives of your organization change. This is something, again, one of those back to basics that every position in your organization, starting with your leadership team, should really have a job scorecard attached to it. Okay, for more information about scorecards and best talent strategies in general, again, if people is your short leg, then you can read, there's great information in the trusty Oldworthy here Scaling Up book on people. And then there's also a book by Bradford Smart called Top Grading, and another book by Jeff Smart, which happens to be his son, called Who. And these have some great tools and guidelines for how you recruit, how you screen for, recruit, and kind of manage talent. So let me pause here and ask, even for those people on the call whose people's short leg might not be, whose people might not be your short leg, what key takeaway have you heard so far about people that might be something you want to consider revisiting or implementing at your organization? So do you have clarity on who's accountable for what function in your organization, and what results you're looking for? Do you have scorecards for each of your positions in your company? Just write down one key takeaway that you've heard thus far, just to make sure you're there and hearing us. Good. Implementing the FACE. Yay, Marshall. Measuring outcomes. Yep.
By role and develop it. Yep.
Oh, Rob, I love it. Redefining metrics. Yep, by role.
And yes, Beth, mentorship and the ability to develop and coach others is definitely a competency.
Yeah.
That you would want to have particularly in your managers and your supervisors.
Yeah, good. Measuring more often. Yep. Reviewing scorecards with 2021 goals. Good. Yeah, people in general like to know what they're responsible for.
And what's expected of them and how they get an A.
So it's not a surprise, right?
Good.
Good. Awesome.
And keep the questions coming. We can answer them as we go as well. So thanks.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next short leg that you may have, which is strategy. So strategy may be your short leg if you answer yes to any of these questions. So go ahead and take a second here. So there's a couple of tools you might want to consider implementing if strategy is your short leg. So the first is the SWT. And this is strengths, weaknesses, and trends. And it's a worksheet that helps senior leadership kind of evaluate your strengths that are key to success, your weaknesses that are unlikely to change, and trends that could impact your organization. So this is an exercise intended for smaller groups. That's typically your executive or your leadership team. And I'm sure some of you on the call might hear of a SWOT. This is a little different. So the SWOT exercise is designed for execution planning, whereas the SWT is for strategic thinking, and it helps kind of senior leaders avoid getting caught in what we call those operational weeds. So this is something that's done, it helps pull managers and leadership teams up to a higher level there. The best practice is to not have more than 6 items per category. And another best practice is for companies to revisit this at least once a year, or when major changes have occurred due to either internal or external factors like a pandemic. People often do this activity once in a blue moon, but you really have to, your strengths can change, trends can change. And so you really want to revisit this just to make sure that you're aware of your trends that are happening in your marketplace, as well as your strengths and weaknesses. Okay.
And what we've heard from the Scaling Up community and the entrepreneurs that we've been working with the past year is that this is probably one of the most valuable exercises for them to do right now.
Yeah, right. Got it. Another resource that might be beneficial when we're talking about strategy is your short leg. And specifically, as we are leaning towards hopefully a post-pandemic world, is to think about how to reinvent your brand at this stage. So it's good to ask yourself what your company's key differentiators are and how they may have changed. So this all gets back to your value proposition, right? So there's a woman named Deb Gabor, and she actually wrote a book, Irrational Loyalty, but she also had a webinar that's available under on the CEO Think Tank website on how to make sure that your company is well positioned to thrive and grow in 2021. So that might be a really good thing to check out. So let me ask you this. How many of you have actually looked at your SWT in the last 60 days?
Or even a SWOT.
Yeah, or even a SWOT, just something like, and if you haven't, I'm curious if you can commit to doing that within the next 30 days. So Beth asked, is the SWT something each department head can do on their own? I would say that's where you can start getting ideas individually from each person in your leadership team, but it's helpful to bring everyone together to narrow it down because everybody might have different ideas. And having that conversation, Beth, would be a really good way to get alignment across your team. But at the end of the day, you do want to pull everyone together to do it.
Ah, Tiffany, good. The cobbler's kids. She's committing to do it in the next 30 days, Jill.
Yay. Good. Has anybody else done it in the last 60 days?
Good job. Yay, Rob, our star pupil. And good.
Again, back to basics.
But
I will. Good. Awesome, Michael.
Okay, we all need accountability nudges. Thanks, guys.
Good.
All right.
Excellent. All right, let's go on to your next short leg. Execution, which I've heard
is a
thing here that everyone seemed to have. Welcome to the club here. So execution can be your short leg if you answer yes to any of these questions. So go ahead and take a minute. So I've got 3 tools to share with you that may help get you back to basics here with execution. All right. The first is an execution tool called Company Priorities. And this tool helps monitor the completion of your company priorities with a little dashboard. I mean, this is really simple, but sometimes simple is not the same as easy, right? But sometimes it's good to have a tool that just helps you articulate what your company priorities are for the year. So if execution's your short leg, or maybe you just haven't taken the time yet because we're often busy to write down what you know the company priorities are for the year, or even this quarter, this would be a really good exercise to complete. This tool can also be used to set top priorities between weekly meetings that you may have with your leadership team or on executing long-term objectives. So just writing down your priorities and who's accountable to kind of wave the red flag if it's going off track, or if you're hitting, if it's at risk and you need help, who's the accountability person that's going to ultimately own that priority. And then every week you kind of can report on, are we on track or not with what we said we were going to get done. This worksheet, when used in conjunction with the next tool, is great ones to have at your back pocket, right? So the individual priorities worksheet helps identify priorities for an individual in the same type of dashboard or status with the green, yellow, red status. So just like company priorities, it's important that each person really especially at the leadership team, understands what their individual priorities are for the year. And I would argue just for the quarter, and how those align with your company priorities. The best practice is to ensure that everyone reports out weekly the status of their top 2 to 3 outcomes to remain on track with their priorities, and so that everyone else can hear where they are and be on track, so that you get that peer accountability across the leadership team, which we have found to be a great motivator, and to get people to make sure they stay on track. So these 2 worksheets are very helpful. Again, back to basics. And a third worksheet, if you really want to, if you have kind of those time pressured individuals, remember there's 13 weeks in a quarter. So what needs to be accomplished this quarter? If your priorities are, it's good to have the big view of what we need to get done this year, but it's even better for an individual to know, what do I need to get done this quarter? And setting up quarterly priorities, especially as the pandemic evolves and your company priorities may shift, right? As the pandemic kind of releases its pressure on us, this might be a really good worksheet to do with your team. So again, these are kind of the growth tools that we'll be sending out after this webinar. But before we move on to the last short leg, do you answer this in the chat? Do you have clearly articulated company priorities for the year? Just yes or no.
That are written down.
That are written down, right? Not
doesn't count
in your head.
Yep. Good. Dave does. Davis does. Yes. Good.
Keep going. 70. Okay. 75% ish. Yep.
Yep. Good.
Thank you for your honesty. Yep. Yes. 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 Some. Yeah. Write them down. Ha, Beth. Just did it. Refining. Okay. Good. I would say this would be a really good exercise then, to figure out, write down what your company priorities are, and then at a minimum, what do we want to get done too in this quarter, in first quarter, or as you go into second quarter.
And who's accountable to lead the charge or wave the flag, as Jill said.
Right.
You can't have a priority without having a person assigned to it.
Right. And you can't have multiple people accountable, because then nobody's accountable. So you want really one lead person who's accountable. Not the same thing as responsible, right? You can have multiple people who are responsible for activities to help get that priority achieved, but you need one person who's going to be in charge of waving the flag if it gets off track. All right, good. All right, let's go on to our last short leg, cash. All right, so cash may be your short leg if you can't answer yes to these questions.
Okay.
So let me get you 2 tools for this. Back to basics here. The first is the cash acceleration strategy worksheet. And this helps teams evaluate and improve every part of what we call their cash conversion cycle. So it's a good time to think about ways that you can improve the 4 main cycles that every business has, right? There's a sales cycle, there's a production cycle, there's a delivery cycle, and then there's the billing and payment cycle. So are there ways that you can shorten your cycle times, eliminate mistakes, or improve your business model to improve any one of those 4 cycles in your business? So you revisit your cash, this acceleration strategy kind of worksheet, to identify opportunities for improvement. And the best practice is to choose a single cash improvement initiative to prioritize every 90 days, right? So every quarter. So you just pick one. Don't try and do all of them within a quarter. Another best practice is to have your available cash reported daily with a short explanation of why it changed for more visibility kind of into your daily cash flow. Right. So now is a really good time to complete this with your middle management too, because that will help strengthen their understanding of how cash flows through the organization.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. The second tool here, if cash may be your short leg, is another resource here you might want to consider, is to learn about techniques that allow business owners to kind of improve their cash flow. From a leader in this space, you may have heard us mention him before if you know us, Greg Crabtree, and he authored this book called Simple Numbers. And then you can also check out his webinar that's on the CEO Think Tank website. And we'll send you a link to this as well. Right, Cheryl Beth? That's part of what the package you'll get here of all these links. But that helps also. It's a great resource to understand what are things we can do when we're looking at kind of our cash.
And for those of you, I think Michael mentioned earlier in the chat, for thinking about how much capital to invest in your business, Greg's new book, Simple Numbers 2.0, actually talks about how to do that, the return on invested capital calculations that you may want to check out. So that's another resource for you.
Yeah. Okay, good. So to recap, we've reviewed 4 decisions you need to make to grow your business profitably: people, strategy, execution, and cash. And then we've also taken the 4D assessment that will help you identify your short leg. Here's some people sitting at a short leg table. And then we've also gone through some tools, right? That plus the links to the CEO Think Tank website that we will send to you after this webinar. And if you go through these and try to do these and have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We are all about giving access to the right tools at the right time. And if you need help kind of with implementing those, let us know. All right. But there's one more variable before you start kind of shoving those sugar packets under your short leg, like we do at our restaurants, is you have to understand also what we call the 3 barriers to growth. And so Cheryl Beth is going to talk about those barriers next. So Cheryl Beth, I pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jill. So yeah, so let's do a little bit more digging and talk about the 3 barriers to growth. And again, some of this is going to be a reminder for some of you, but for some of you, it may be new information. So if you think back to when your company was just 2 people, this startup situation represented 2 channels of communication, or degrees of complexity, if you'd like to think of it that way. And anyone in a relationship knows that 2 people can be difficult enough. But when you add a 3rd person, or a customer, or a location, or a product, the degree of complexity triples from 2 to 6. Add a 4th, and it quadruples to 24. So expanding from 3 to 4 people grows the team only by 30%, but exponentially grows your business challenges. And the complexity just keeps growing. Wouldn't it be great, however, if you actually had a crystal ball to help you understand and forecast those complexities? Well, we don't have a crystal ball, but we have something that's close. So another one of the tools that our CEO think tank community has found helpful in order to see what lies ahead or even what state they're currently in as the business scales is the 7 stages of growth. So this tool is actually based on the book Navigating the Growth Curve by James Fisher, published back in 0405, who studied 650 entrepreneurial companies. Among other things, this model identifies the number one priority of the organization as the number of employees increases. So as you can see, if you look across the top, and this is based on full-time equivalents, by the way, so it doesn't include subcontractors. It is just based on FTEs. If you have a 35-person organization, 34, 35, you are actually transitioning between the delegation stage, number 3, to the professional stage, number 4. And your number one priority needs to shift. You'll see that under 3 gates of focus from people at the delegation stage to process at the professional stage, otherwise known as execution. So take a minute to look through these stages based on the number of staff that you have on your team in your company. What stage is your company at? Do you have 1 to 10 folks? And so you're still at the startup phase. Do you have 11 to 19? You're getting into ramp up. Are you at the higher end? Over 100, so you're at strategic or visionary. Just put that in the chat for us so that we know where we're going. 7, Bob, thank you. 1, Tiffany, still growing. 27, Beth's in the delegation. 3, 6. A lot of folks in that startup ramp up area. By the way, when you see those 3 gates of focus early on, with profit being number 1, profit is all about good execution. So this is another confirmation for those of you that are trying to figure out what your short leg is and where you ought to be focusing. Back to 5, 7, 29. Lots of delegation folks. Great. Yeah, Rob's at the high end.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it comes all back to people again. So let's dig a little bit deeper into these 3 barriers. And what we'd like to do at this point is share some stories with you that illustrate how you can use the scaling up tools, how other CEOs and entrepreneurs have used the scaling up tools to work to overcome these barriers. So Vern actually confirms James Fisher's findings in his book, Scaling Up. And if you want to grab a copy and take a look at chapter 2, he actually goes into these 3 barriers in depth. The first barrier he identifies is lack of leadership and the ability to attract, retain, and grow enough leaders throughout the organization who have the capabilities to delegate and manage. The second barrier to growth is the ability to create a scalable infrastructure and processes. In other words, designing and implementing the systems and structures, physical as well as organizational, to handle the complexities in communication and decision-making and the customer and supplier interactions that come with growth. And then finally, the third barrier to growth is market dynamics. We're going to be talking about that later, which will make you look brilliant or ignorant, as Vern says. Unfortunately, the failure to address the increased competitive pressures that build as you scale your company often erode your margins and your profit. And it has caused many companies to flatline and struggle to grow. But the really cool thing is when you remove these barriers, step by step, inch by inch, and yard by yard, then that anchor that's dragging you turns into a wind at your back. Now, there are lots of stories on CEO Think Tank's blog that you can check out, where you can see how other companies have done it. But as I said earlier, we want to zero in on three stories to give you some real life examples. So let's start with Ebu. Mia Gallison, and some of you I know her, started Ebu, a boutique women-owned toy manufacturer that specializes in useful, beautiful, and well-made educational games, puzzles, and gifts. over 2 decades ago, wanting to create a new paradigm for what it meant to be a working mother. By the beginning of last year, she and her team had grown her Manhattan-based business into an $8 million global company, selling mainly through specialty and targeted box stores. Slow and steady growth lined up with her initial mission of woman-owned, mother-run, and sustainably sourced. And while she had toyed with, no pun intended here, the idea of direct-to-consumer, she was reluctant to pursue it. Like many small entrepreneurial businesses, her processes and systems were informal. Her team was energetic and hardworking, but without a lot of experience in formal training, and their execution and profitability was suffering as a result. In 2018, she started implementing Scaling Up as an operating system as part of a C200 protege cohort, a women's leadership group for companies looking to reach $20 million in revenue. But Mia quickly realized that she needed a more hands-on and customized approach if she really wanted to achieve her goal of getting to 20 million in revenue. So she reached out to us in late 2019 and brought us on board to educate her team and assist her to up her game in 2020. Perfect timing and a perfect storm. Given EBOO's location, they were at the epicenter of the pandemic and were one of the first to go into lockdown in March of last year. The world changed overnight, but Mia courageously decided to go full steam ahead implementing the Scaling Up operating system using our growth curriculum, and kudos to her for doing so. She and her team started to hold weekly virtual educational meetings to learn the operating system, about 2 hours in length for those of you who are thinking about doing something similar, rapidly developing a working one-page strategic plan, implementing a direct-to-consumer business model, including working with her warehouses to manage inventory and updating the website and her customer service organization. We helped her to keep her team focused and aligned in spite of working remotely by developing scorecards and management accountability plans, just like you've been seeing, as well as implementing weekly tactical meetings, another key part of good execution, and a more robust daily huddle, which we highly recommend during COVID, if nothing else. All critical steps for good execution, as well as good talent management, and learning Zoom in the process. It was a lot of work, but they persevered. And as a result, she and her team successfully launched a whole new direct-to-consumer business channel. They leveraged the opportunity presented by the pandemic and the lockdowns. Jigsaw puzzles, it turns out, are very popular during a pandemic. And they grew the business by over 50% with amazing margins. They also grew their customer base, as you would imagine, and their reputation for being a very high quality, sustainably focused company that delivered. More recently, recognizing the need to have the right leaders on our team, again, that leadership barrier, to sustain what they had created, specifically with experiences selling digitally and managing a far-flung operation, an integrator role to balance her chief creative officer role, Mia reached out last summer and hired 2 very experienced senior level leaders and brought them on board. And as a result, they are extremely well positioned for 2021 and taking the company to 20 million in revenue over the next few years. Well, that's just one story. And if you want to just write down a couple of your takeaways as we're going through these, I think that would be great so that we can get your questions and answer specifics. But we actually have someone on the call, Rob Gilfillan, who is president of, oops, I'm having flashes coming up. Sorry, carbonite. Let me allow Rob to talk so that we can get him on board.
Am I unmuted?
You are,
Mr.
Gilfillan, president of Synero, headquartered in the greater Philadelphia area, an alum of CEO Think Tank, who has used the principles behind Scaling Up to grow over the past 2 decades. He has his own story about market dynamics that he has offered to share with us today. So Rob, why don't you give the group a little bit of your company's background and your work over the past few years to pivot and re-engineer your processes.
Sure, that'd be great. It's always fun going through these because it's like you keep looking at things like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah, I got to revisit that. I mean, there's tons and tons of things. Just a little bit about us. The company Synero was founded back in 1999. We are a privately held company with two owners, myself and my business partner, Chris Henry. We're primarily focused on developing exceptional meeting experiences for clients, primarily in, I'll call it Fortune 3,500 and under organizations. So boardrooms, conference rooms, training rooms, any type of meeting centers. We're really focused on designing, building, and providing data analytics and services around those spaces. I will say COVID, you might be thinking this has probably been great for your business. In short term in COVID, it really was not, because in order for us to actually continue to grow the business, we actually have to get into people's spaces. So COVID hit us pretty hard. We had to lay off about a third of our company very quickly, which we've never laid anyone off in the 21 years that we've been in business. We've brought about 90% of those people back at this point. And I think that the story around really between March and today, and a lot of the things we're talking about here resonate with our company, is that COVID was actually kind of I hate to say it, a blessing in disguise, and that we had been rapidly growing for years. Actually, when I started CEO Think Tank, I think we might have had 20 employees at the time, back in the early 2000s. And I mean, literally when I started, I really, I could read a P&L, but I didn't really know much about a balance sheet. And I was first and foremost a salesperson, secondary a business person that had to learn a lot of things along the way. So, and a lot of it's baptism by fire. I'd like to say that I was ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff, but unfortunately, a lot of times you get into it and you realize afterwards what you went through and what you should have done. So the one thing that's been interesting about the past, really, I guess what now, almost 11 months, is that going into COVID, we were growing very rapidly, and we really hit kind of a ceiling in terms of our production and sales as well. We hired people too quickly. As you know, it was very difficult to try to find people. So as we found them, we hired them. And I've always been a fan of hiring into the pipeline. So if I see the pipeline there, I'll hire into it. But we had a lot of processes and management hierarchy and whatnot that were outdated. We really had a problem with trying to deliver and recognize revenue. So by going through, March, April, May, and June, we really got a chance to take a step back, take a look at our entire business, the processes that we've been using for a while, which ones were outdated, and we scrapped a ton of them and really took a bottom up look at the business. And over the past 10 months, we've really re-engineered almost the entire organizational structure and how we and our production process. So the net result of that is we're actually able to deliver more products and services with about 10% fewer people, which ultimately is going to be beneficial for 2021, which we're very bullish on. But I mentioned it here several times. The challenge I have is around execution. It's actually, we fixed a lot of things on the execution side, but there's always room for improvement, always. And as you continue to grow and you just have more and more challenges. People are challenged no matter where you are. I mean, I think we can all agree with that. But I just wanted to share that bit of information. I know Cheryl Beth, if you want to add anything else or want me to talk about anything else there.
Yeah, well, and I think, I mean, you did have some really good foundations in place, Rob, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you have a very strong culture. Rob and his partner, Chris Henry, have always been committed to developing people and providing leadership and coaching and just a really strong value on not just sitting still, right?
Hey, it's a good point, actually. When you have a good culture, and it kind of hit me in the face during the process. So we laid off 72 people in one day. And it was the most difficult day in business in my entire professional career. I've never done that. The one thing that was really fascinating as we look back weeks weeks after that is there wasn't one person we laid off that didn't feel more sorry for us than themselves. They're like, look, we feel bad for you guys having to do this. There was one individual we had that we knew was toxic within the organization that, you know, went kind of DEFCON 1 on the whole thing and screaming, making a whole scene. But everyone else felt really bad about us having to go through this because they know that we really value the employees. And during this process, as you guys probably have, you put your kind of circle together of different business owners and managers trying to compare notes and see what are they doing, how are they making out. And I had about 5 or 6 people that I got together with, and out of those 5 or 6, 3 of them, when they went through this process, had 50% of the employees like significant backlash. And, you know, during the conversation, I said, well, you have a culture issue, you know, you just didn't know it. So because, you know, this isn't something that you did. I mean, this is something that happened to all of us, and we got to figure out how to respond to it. So, you know, that was actually really interesting going through that, you know, looking back 2 weeks later, I'm like, I guess we're doing a pretty good job given the response we got from most people as we laid them off. And again, we brought 90% of them back. So
Yeah, which is great, and a tribute to the work that you guys did in preparation for the storm, as Jim Collins would say. Thank you, Rob, very much.
Thanks, Rob.
thank you.
Again, just take a minute to, like, if you heard some things that sort of struck a chord or made a light bulb go on as Rob was talking about some of the things that they did, please just make a note of it.
Yeah. Okay, we have one more story that we'd like to share with you. And, you know, these tools, a lot of people attribute them applying to the for-profit world, but actually they apply to the nonprofit world as well. So the final story we wanted to share with you was about an organization called the Opportunity House, which is outside the Philadelphia region. And they offer emergency shelter, permanent and temporary housing, as well as a large learning center, actually, for children with families that fall below the poverty level. So I first met their leadership team right when COVID started, which was back in March. And the organization had been operating on an $800,000 line of credit that over the past decade never dropped below $700,000. They also had a sizable loan balance that was coming due in December of 2020. They had average monthly payables of around $200,000. And while their programs were well run, and they seemed to be making an impact, right, in their community, there was a belief that certain areas of what they were doing could be improved and then better reflect the trends, the market dynamics in their community. And so one of the first things we did was looking at all of those things that, you know, that companies that want to deliver superior performance, make a distinctive impact, ensure lasting endurance on their community. It's to focus on getting the right people, working with them, thinking strategically, improving their execution, and then becoming fiscally sound. So the early stages of putting kind of a plan together were really challenging because we were doing it all remote, not in person. But the biggest challenge right out of the bat was kind of getting each department head to think on an organizational level, on that macro level, versus just within their silos. Each leader was always thinking about their kind of department. So they were all stuck there. And so we had to break down the silos. So this gets to the leadership part of one of those 3 barriers to growth. And the leadership team started to have weekly meetings that began in May. And then we set a set agenda that helped them discuss issues that were cross-functional. And then that bridged the gap between strategic and tactical, right? Because they were all used to being in the weeds and we had to learn how to get above the weeds. And then by August, the executive team began holding daily huddles with each department head reporting out on metrics from the prior day along with their goal for that current day. Then they also instituted monthly meetings, and the team focused on strategic discussions such as defining their organization's core values, their purpose, like their brand promise, to what they were trying, the impact they were trying to make to the community. So a lot of it, when you guys were putting in the chat, we might have execution issues. Meeting rhythms really have to be applied in order to kind of get those execution behaviors to take root, right? So from a leadership perspective, the other thing we did was that each member of the executive team now has scorecards, the one you saw earlier, and they have quarterly goals and they have job competencies that align to each position. So the accountabilities are articulated and communicated to one another, and everyone reports up every month what are the 2 to 3 outcomes on their scorecards they're responsible for, so that everyone else can hear what that is. In addition, I mentioned finance was a big piece of this when they started, because they had cash flow issues and a line of credit. So they realized that they had to start looking at their finances from a strategic finance perspective, different than an accounting perspective, right? And that helped them to see where efficiencies could be gained in their processes, in their people, how they're using their people, in what departments. And they have that goal now of having that 2 to 3 months operating expenses available to them so that they can be their own line of credit, right? And help smooth out any cash flow issues that they historically had. So the strategies that they've implemented have resulted in the organization becoming stronger. They're more focused on their purpose and they're fiscally sound. And they have a leadership team. This all gets back to kind of that barrier to growth around leadership that has the right execution disciplines and accountabilities. And they have a process by which they have a robust reporting system for understanding their cash position. And by the end of the year, they had a line of credit down to 0. All their payables are current, and they're well positioned to kind of grow organically to help further serve their community, right, from a healthy position. So just getting back to execution, and in this case, cash, that helped to drive results within their organization. So for those that, I know there are a few of you that are in the nonprofit world, these things also apply. Best practices from the for-profit world still can glean things here.
So as you think about these stories, as you think about EBU and the challenges that they faced, as they pivoted in the middle of the pandemic, and what Rob talked about at Sonero, having successfully grown and then having to re-engineer, and then Opportunity House and some of the fiscal and execution issues. What's your takeaway? Like, what's one of your key takeaways in terms of your own barriers to growth? Do you need to focus on your leadership? Do you need to focus on putting processes and systems in place? Do you need to proactively address your market dynamics? And if you can put that in the chat so that we can get a little bit of feedback. So is your biggest barrier leadership and people and talent? Yes, the end results are encouraging. It's a lot of work, Tiffany.
It can happen.
It didn't happen overnight, but yes. Hopefully this is a sanity check. Again, biggest barriers: leadership, processes and systems, people, leadership. Yep.
More consistent. Jim Collins, Michael Reiner, your comment. Jim Collins says that the difference between good to great organizations is really about discipline. So.
Market barriers, yes. Hey, real quick, Jill. So Michael had a question about the growth, the 7 stages of growth. If contractors are still part of the team like employees, why do they not count against the number? Can you address that from your own work?
Yeah, sure. I think with the 7 stages of growth, like with contractors, right, there's a difference for how you use contractors versus employees. And, the IRS has their long list of behavioral qualifications as well as financial. But the deal is when you're looking, you're looking for your FTEs, because when you have FTEs, you know that they're going to be there all the time, and that you can build processes with them. You have to manage people differently when they're employees versus contractors. And then there's also things about profitability when you carry full-time FTEs versus variable contractors. So the model is based on FTEs because they're constant, the people are there, they aren't variable. So that's how that model kind of works. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but.
Yeah, good. All right, so we've got to just to do a process check for ourselves. We've got about 15 minutes left, and what I think we'd like to do is to take a couple of minutes and talk to you about the one-page strategic plan, as well as the scaling up roadmap to ground you, and then we'll take the last 7 or 8 minutes to show you what your options might be for yourselves as you reflect on the tools that we've talked about, as well as take additional questions. So again, please continue to put questions in the Q&A or in the chat.
So at this point, you might have enough to do as next steps with some of those maybe tools we've shown you. But if you feel like you're pretty good, then maybe you need one overarching construct to help put all these things together. And that's what we call the one-page strategic plan. And this is your 3 to 5 year plan that combines strategic planning, strategic execution, and execution planning activities for your business into one-page plan, which is really 2 pages, but it's 1 page backs, with a front page and a back side. So just to break it down real quickly for those that haven't seen it yet, the core of the plan are these sections of the plan. Those are parts of the business that won't change, such as your core values, your purpose, your core competencies. The second kind of part of the plan is comprised of what we call strategic planning elements. It defines what your focus is going to be over the next 3 years, what financial targets you want to hit 3 years from now, and then how you're going to draw upon your strengths, how you're going to manage your weaknesses, and how you're going to identify your trends in your marketplace. And then the third kind of part of the plan is all about execution, right? And this identifies what you will focus on annually, then quarterly within that year, and lining up individual accountabilities to that. So the plan's really succinct with it. All of the areas on the plan are listed here on this left-hand side. So these can be found in the book, Scaling Up. So this book, again, if you don't have it, I would say get it. It's fun to read it with certain chapters, depending on what you want to work on. The book is written by Vern. He's won 8 major international book awards, including the International Book Award for Best General Business. This isn't going to go away. This is kind of a staple in the small to mid-sized companies for one of their resources. So if you want to get started right away, for those that like details, start reading chapter 8. That'll give you a jump on it. And from our experience, it's still helpful to have what we call a roadmap that helps guide your leadership team, not just on how to create a plan, but then how to execute on it. And each roadmap is a little different depending on what stage of growth your company's in and the foundations that you've already put in place. So on average, it takes 2 to 3 years. Let me say that again, 2 to 3 years to identify and execute on your roadmap. It's not a 2 to 3 month activity. What we're seeing here is an example of year 1. So if you're interested in self-implementing this, like on the left-hand side, you have a breakdown of all the elements on the one-page strategic plan. And in addition, there's some areas or activities included from the Scaling Up book, like the FACE that we went over, the SWT, some of these tools, right? And then on the right side of the roadmap is adopting meeting cadences. So monthly, quarterly, annually up at the top here that you see it, whereas 20% of your time should be focused on working on the business, not in the business, right? And so here it kind of lays out when you could potentially learn about these topics and then start implementing them and reinforcing them, and then annually what you need to update on the plan. All right, so we're going to send you this. So if you're interested in self-implementing, you kind of have the roadmap for how to do that with the book, with the growth tools that we're going to send you to, that we have been using today. So, all right, so we're going to recap real quickly. So in the last hour, we have gone over the 4 critical decisions that you need to make to grow your business: strategy, people, cash, and execution. And we started with an assessment for how you begin to identify your short leg. We learned about the 3 barriers to growth, which is, again, leadership, market dynamics, and a scalable infrastructure. We also shared the 7 stages of growth model with you and some case stories for how companies navigated those barriers. And then the last thing, we also introduced the 1-page strategic plan plus a roadmap, a sample 1-year roadmap that you can use as your guide. So I'm going to hand it back to Cheryl Beth, who's going to review next steps and resources that you'll receive following the webinar.
Yeah, and this would be a good time to put your questions and comments into the Q&A or into the chat. But at this stage, as Jill started to say, we see that you have a couple possible options for going forward, because there's always a path forward. One, you can certainly self-implement, as she's already talked about, and do it yourself if that's the type of person that you are. The second is you can engage with a certified scaling up coach, and we will say certified scaling up coach. I'll add that little tweak. Because there's a lot of benefit that Jill and I get because we're part of the Scaling Up community to assist you, and consider joining our CEO Think Tank community to get support and guidance as well. And finally, third, you actually may be in great shape and doing okay and choose to do nothing. So let's talk briefly about the options. Again, buy the book, grab the growth tools, download the roadmap from CEO Think Tank's website, and go to it. If you are interested in having a conversation about scaling up coaching and engaging with a coach, you can go to CEO Think Tank's website and hit the inquire button, and in the comments just say attended your Back to Business webinar and want to talk. We do have several levels of support based on your needs and your goals and your budget, from joining one of our executive roundtable groups to get you peer-to-peer support from other enlightened leaders who are using the Scaling Up tools and other best business practices, to our Scaling Up Foundations program, which is designed, as it says, to put in place the foundations of a Scaling Up operating system to get you started. For those of you who might not have as much time, but you don't want to wait, to the Scaling Up Intensive and Master's programs, for those of you who want to accelerate your growth and leverage the opportunities that have been presented by the past year, like Mia, and you can't afford to wait, and you've got to start accelerating your growth now. So again, check out our curriculum, our offerings, and our pricings. One of the changes that we've made in the past year is to become completely transparent about what we do and how we do it. And then finally, we said that we were going to give you all a special offer. So hopefully some folks are sticking around. To the first 5 qualified companies that reach out following this webinar, a complimentary cash flow story analysis, one of the key foundational items that we use with all of our Scaling Up clients, to help you identify the 7 levers that you can use to improve your company's cash flow as well as profitability. This Power of One cash flow analysis will help you to quantify the impact of a 1% change or a 1-day adjustment on your cash flow. Again, just hit the inquire button on the website and put cash flow story in the comments. We do have one word of warning for you. We do need to have access to the last 3 years of your financials in order to run this particular analysis for you. So just be ready. And we're looking forward to hearing from you. Again, that will be to the first 5 folks that reach out to us that are able to provide their financials. That's what we mean by qualified. So at this point, Q&A. I did see Bob actually mentioned rocket fuel and Gino Wickman's book. I talked about traction. Yes, for those of you with execution issues, Gino Wickman, who actually wrote Traction, the first book, is one of Vern Harnish's students. So he was a part of the Entrepreneurs Organization back in the 90s. And so a lot of the best practices that Gino shares in those books and is shared in Rocket Fuel actually come out of the Scaling Up operating system. Oh, and look at that. Bob's already been using the power of one. He's ahead.
Nice.
Bob, it's been great to have you on this call. Thank you so much. If you can just, as you're thinking about it, even if you don't have any questions, just some of your takeaways from our conversation today, it's always helpful for Jill and I to get feedback about what your number one takeaway or your next step is going to be. So if you can put that in the chat, that would also be great. Jill, any other comments?
No, I'm just reading all the chat comments and questions if anyone has any, but it looks like people felt it was time well spent, which is very good feedback for us too. We try and provide value because we know time is of such a short commodity in people's days. So we appreciate your time being here today.
Any other? Building clarity. Yep, starting up my business. Great, Susie. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Rob, for being here too.
Thanks to all of you that have worked with us over the past few years, even the ones, Faith, that have been here, going back a ways. Good. Clearly need help. Yes. Where to start? That's the question, Beth. Hopefully you have a better idea of where you need to start and get going.
Short leg.
Short leg. Yeah, exactly.
And Cheryl Beth, you'll be sending out the links to everything by tomorrow. Is that the?
Exactly. So you'll be getting links to the resources that we talked about tomorrow. I mean, you can certainly go to the website now if you're interested in Cash Flow Story. Go ahead and shoot us an email. Like I said, that's the first 5 qualified folks that reach out to us. So go
We'd love to help.
Yeah, we would. CEOthinktank.com. Very simple and straightforward.
And hello, Juniper.
Oh, thanks, Erica. Great having you guys on your call. Andrea, definitely, we will keep you on our mailing list. And please, as we said, please spread the word. We're going to be doing these quarterly, these meetings quarterly. So please let other people know.
Great.
For the next one in May. Good. Anything else? No. Good. All right.
All right.
I'll be wrapping it up, Jill. If you
Great. Thank you all for spending the last hour and a half with us. We appreciate it.
Yep. Goodbye. And
Bye.
shout if you have any questions, folks. We're here. Thank you.